Welcome back to another episode of the Supercar Killer M3 presented by Turn 14 Distribution. Today we're going to do final fit up on the engine and start test fitting some other stuff. First of all, everyone, let's address the elephant in the room, and that is my sweet new Turn 14 hoodie. I don't know if you guys can even get these. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but I think this is pretty dope. It's like a, I don't know, like a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air type thing going on here.
It's an homage to MTV.
It's an MTV thing, of course it is. Thank you, Peter, for having that pop culture reference on hand. As for the rest of it, well, as you guys would have seen last episode, we are very excited to have this 2JZ bolted into place here, and it does fit, but it is extremely tight to the subframe where the oil pan is like almost touching. And we have a bit of a clearance issue too with the steering rack where the column attaches onto the steering rack, coming really close to the Freed Engineering mount. We actually talked to Freed Engineering about it, and they said they designed these mounts with a poly bushing that's a little bit taller than OE. So they're suggesting we just shim the motor up a little bit to get those clearances back into what we would consider spec. And I think that'll solve those problems. And we have a few other little things that we're going to tune up, and then we'll move on to installing some new parts that we'll show you. But first, we're going to have to pull this thing out, I think, aren't we, Pete?
Yes, we are.
To address some of those clearance issues. So let's get to work.
As you guys just saw there, we made easy removal of this entire engine and subframe with our new Harbor Freight cart here. Picked this sucker up thinking this was going to be a good addition to doing the engine swap stuff, and lo and behold, it works exceptionally well. However, the bleeding on it is a nightmare, but that is for another story. Ask me in a live stream. I'll tell you all about the nonsense that you got to do with that. So right now what we're going to do is remove the gearbox, take the subframe off so we can get to the front of this motor because we have some timing belt stuff to do. That is how you waste about an hour and a half trying to take a crank pulley bolt off. And as you see, we haven't been able to do it. We're kind of at a point now where I think we need to buy the specialty Toyota tool because the tool that I built, wow, this is like a 1/4 inch thick plated steel. I didn't think it would bend, but maybe because I put the bend in it and then we added that long pipe and it wasn't like a perfect direct fit onto here, it just tweaked it enough where it started bending it. But anyways, even then I would think that it would get to a point where it would release this bolt, and it hasn't. So the internet says this bolt is very tricky to remove. There's a tool that goes into here, and then you can actually put another whole socket or long pry bar setup on it to hold it in place. I'm still not sure that's going to work. I'm thinking you just need a super strong gun. However, I did mark this before trying to loosen it, and it has moved maybe 1/8 of an inch. So something is happening. We're gonna try the gun on it one more time just to see, maybe me pulling on it there, moved it slightly enough just to get maybe the gun will work, but we may have to move on to other more important things at this point.
Getting ready for the old rubber glove treatment here, PT. I feel like we've been getting the rubber glove treatment on that whole crank pulley bolt deal, but since we've taken a pass on that, we are now moving on to fitting up the oil sump arrangement. As you guys will recall, in an earlier episode, we discovered that the upper aluminum portion that we had bought was broken. And so Pete went ahead and bought a new sump arrangement off the internet, and this one's complete and it's not broken. So we're gonna clean it up like you saw us do before, taking off the old sealant and getting ready to seal everything back up again. So we'll have to prep the surface on the bottom of the block as well. And by the way, I threw on these new Challenger nitrile rubber gloves from our friends at Napa. These are 8mm thick, which I quite like. They're quite thin, so it gives me a good feel when I'm doing, you know, detail type jobs. But generally speaking, when I'm swinging wrenches, I do like these more breathable, sort of more heavy duty style that have the rubberized palms on them. I like them because they're, like I said, they're light and breathable, but they still give you a really good grip with this. And if you get a bit of oil on there, it doesn't like soak through. Like in a traditional style mechanic glove like these ones, they're warmer and thicker, but if you get oil on it, it just soaks into it. So these I think we'll reserve for more like not greasy, dirty jobs, but something that you may want, you know, a little bit more heavy duty towards. But in general, I'm a big fan of these guys, also Challenger gloves. And then for the really dirty stuff, throw on these disposable ones and get dirty. So I'm gonna start by scraping off this stuff, and then we'll clean it up a bit more with a little mild pad. And I think we'll be ready to bolt this up.
Well, Dave, I think it's pretty much the end of the day here, and we've accomplished two things, one of which we failed, which was trying to loosen that crank pulley. So I guess we didn't really accomplish it, but we tried that, and we just spent, what, an hour and a half?
Too much time, yeah.
Cleaning, prepping, making sure everything's good. It's hard for us to work on this stuff because usually there's so much other good things we want to show you, and this is the boring stuff, but it has to be done, and it's got to be done properly. Quick tip, I use this 3M gasket remover pad, which worked exceptionally well. I definitely give that a thumbs up for this job. And the next thing we're gonna do here is put down some of the right stuff. This is a good silicone OEM spec for our oil pan here, our upper pan. And we have our rear sump assembly complete, bolted on. Should mention one quick little thing. I bought this little block off plate. There's usually a sensor that goes there for, I think it's like the oil level sensor on the Aristos. So I just bought this block off plate on there. Next up here is this coolant line that runs around the back. Because we're ditching our whole oil filter housing assembly there, I'm going to cut this off here, which is going to reduce this length because otherwise we'd have to have a heater core line running off of there all the way back up. So I'm going to cut this right here to shorten it. I'm going to weld this up, and I've got these two redundant outlets here that also need to be welded. So essentially we're just going to have one loop around.
Now that Pete's got this coolant tube all welded up and in place, we've reinstalled the PMC adapter plate, and we should note that we now have that automatic transmission flex plate that you need to make this all work. And by the way, there's two spacers that can go behind here, but you only want to use the one, the thicker of the two. And this adapter here is actually from PMC, included in the kit, and it basically just extends the crankshaft so that their custom flywheel has a place to sit on rather than it just being held on with the bolts. So as you can see, this is their flywheel that we showed you before, which has this replaceable mating surface and is of course the correct offset and everything to mate this engine to our M3 gearbox. So we're gonna bolt this up with the supplied hardware right now, and then we will show you the rest of the process. Look at all this aluminum-y goodness right here, everybody. Wow, this is a pretty sweet setup. And it has all been torqued and thread locked to spec, so it is good to go, which means we can move on to installing the clutch. Of course, for that we have turned to our friends at Spec, who we get our usual high torque blue pressure plate from, and we have gone with their Stage 3 Plus, which as you can see is a full face carbon semi-metallic disc, same material front and rear, sprung hub, and this apparently gives us the best combination of torque capacity and street drivability. So they really recommend this for like high horsepower street cars or track cars that still want like a very drivable feel to them, a very like not a crazy heavy clutch pedal and not a super grabby launch. So I believe the torque capacity on this is 671 pound-feet, which is a very specific number. And just like that, the pressure plate is torqued down to factory spec. We even threw a little thread locker on there for good measure. And now it's time for the most satisfying sound in the world, everyone. Just maybe come in a little closer, Pete, so they can really get the full effect here. Oh, I ruined it with touching the metal, but you get the idea. One of the benefits of working Valvoline is that they sent us 40 tubs of this multi-purpose grease, which does say Japanese vehicles on it. So we're just, and it also says European. So it works still in
Good
this
thing. I was going to say
combination.
we're working on a German transmission.
It's the perfect combination, PT. So I've lubed up that shaft with the hands of a very skilled lube expert, and I think it's time to slap this thing on here and bolt it on, Pete. This is getting exciting. Well, the gearbox is bolted up using all the supplied hardware from PMC, and it is looking good, which means it's time to do a little bit of tuning on our subframe here. As we mentioned earlier, we were just really close to making contact with the oil pan in these sort of corner areas on the subframe. So we're just going to take a little hammer and give it a bit of a tap there. Plus, the guys at Freed Engineering were saying we'd also gain some clearance both to the rack and the subframe if we shim this up. So Pete went to the stash and found these really nice, heavy-duty, fairly thick washers. I don't know, it's at least an inch,
Yeah.
eighth of an inch thick. So I think that,
And they
happen
fit,
to
like,
fit
perfectly.
Look at that. It's as if they were designed for these mounts. So we do have 2 of these going on. I think between that and a little tappy here, we'll be in good shape. So it is now time to watch Pete wield another hammer.
Well, that actually was kind of easy. Wasn't like the chassis. This metal came in, so as you can see here, we've kind of clearanced these areas, I think, where we were very, very close. So anyways, but with these shims that we've added, I think it's going to raise this up and it's not going to be an issue, but just for the sake of it, we're good to go. So I think it is time we put this motor back onto the subframe and fit this thing back up. DP, I think I found my new favorite tool here, and it is this hydraulic table. It's making this engine removal in and out pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Like we just got this back in what, like 5 minutes?
Yeah, it was totally painless.
Stunning.
Yeah.
And just judging by the amount of space we have right now, I think we've solved pretty much all our issues, but let me get the rear transmission mount back on and then we'll show you everything.
Well, she's all bolted in place, including that trans cross member, and it is looking awfully good in here now, Pete. We have, I think, sufficient clearance to the subframe. We've got at least a 1/4 inch of clearance all the way around there, so I don't think as the engine moves it's going to contact the subframe. And we've got the same around the steering column connection point here off the rack. We've got a 1/4 inch or so clearance there. So I think that's all we needed, man. It really seems pretty happy now. Well, looking around up top here, we're doing pretty well, although this coolant outlet here on the very back of the motor is very close to the firewall.
It's always been like that, yeah.
This is like a plastic bit here, so I think we can make it work. We're tempted to sort of bend that spout back this way a little bit, but man, if we crack it or ovalize it in the head, that would really not be great. So I think we're gonna leave that one for later. We have 2 outlets here for the heater core, and you can see we've already bent this one up to clear this area, but the other one is right in line with where maybe the fuel rail is gonna go. So
Yeah, we've got an aftermarket solution from Radium.
Yeah.
So that might change
That might
it.
give
So
us the space
anyways,
we need.
we're not going to touch that yet, but
If
yeah.
not, like that's easy to bend, so I think we can get around that. The biggest issue we have is, if you look down in this space here, the brake booster has this sort of like hump in it, and we test fit the plenum portion of the manifold here, and it is hitting on there hard. Like it needs to go back another 1/2 inch. So we were contemplating just like clearancing it with a hammer, like we've been doing with everything else lately, but we're not exactly sure how delicate the booster is, and it's just a diaphragm in there with an air chamber on this side of it. So I think we could dent it in without damaging it, but I'm gonna do a little more homework on that before we go ahead and doing that. And the other thought was maybe swapping in a smaller booster, although then you're maybe compromising the performance of the braking system. So I don't know, let us know in the comment section what you guys think. Should we clearance the booster? Should we go to a smaller booster? It's time to show you our solution to power steering on this engine and chassis combo. We've gone to Chase Bays for their E46 with a 2J in it or 1J in it power steering reservoir kit. It is a complete kit with all of the lines that you need to mate the BMW steering rack to the 2JZ power steering pump. And the magic for this kit actually really happens inside the reservoir. From reading on their website, which has a really detailed description of what's going on in here, and go give that a read if you want more information, but it's triple baffled inside, and apparently what happens is the high pressure line, which comes into the smaller fitting here, can come in at PSI as high as 120 PSI. So it is under a lot of pressure, and as it charges into this container, it can cause aeration and foaming, and that will fill the container up, and it'll actually come out the vent tube. They've actually baffled the vent tube that's built into this cap to prevent any of that happening, but they've also double baffled the inside of this to prevent that aeration, that foaming. And part of the trick is there's actually like a chimney inside that the high pressure line feeds up through, and that slows that PSI from 120 to 12 in about a 2-inch travel distance. So really impressive, top secret hidden technology inside here that apparently does an amazing job of preventing that. So a lot of times when guys see like power steering fluid leaking out the top, it's through that vent tube, and it's not because you've boiled the fluid, it's because of that aeration, that foaming, and that high pressure situation that you've got going in there. So this solves all that. Test fit complete, and it's looking pretty good in there. We haven't hard mounted this yet, but we have a good location for the bracket that they supplied. We just need to bolt it in place. And the lines all run the way you want them to. They're the right lengths. And this really solves the problem of having to like engineer this yourself. So like typically we'd have to like figure out what size fittings we need and what size lines we need. And we've done this before, like on the K-Swap to 240, where you have to go and source, you know, oddball fittings and stuff. So this just makes it a turnkey solution. Drop it in and go. So I think it's $300 well spent just to save all that time and effort of figuring it out ourselves. So time for a quick bit of show and tell before we start trying to fit these parts up. This is, as you can read from the label, CSF's radiator for the E46 M3. This is not designed for 2J swap, so we're going to make it work. And this uses their triple pass 2-row. It's a 42 mil core. And one of the cooler technologies at CSF, no pun intended, is their B-tube technology. So these tubes that the water flow through, they have a B shape to them. So if you think of the shape in a cross section, typically the tube would be like oval shaped, but the B shape that CSF uses actually makes it much stronger, and that allows them to use a thinner, lighter weight material, and that is better for heat dissipation. It's more efficient, basically. So the other thing they do that's really cool with these cores is they use what they call a multi-louvered fin design. And based on what my brain can comprehend trying to look through this is that the way they actually angle the fins, or the louvers on the fins, is such that it optimizes airflow through the core. And they actually wind tunnel test the core to verify that that's the most efficient design. And they wind tunnel each design for different applications. So it's not just like one size fits all. They actually engineer each application very specifically with CFD and actual wind tunnel testing. So I think that's pretty darn impressive. Also love the mirror finish they do on, they call this their 1 hour mirror finish. As you can see, it uses the BMW style quick disconnect plates for inlets and outlets. It's got all the factory style tabs and mounting points on it so that it's a direct fit into the E46 M3. And it's also compatible with their race spec oil cooler. So this is their race spec oil cooler right here. And this is one beefy boy. She is going to take a hit and not change shape at all, because man, this thing is tough. It is bar and plate design, and it's a 8-row. Also uses their multi-louver design for efficiency, and it's a 2-pass rather than the factory one, which is a single pass. So it's much more efficient, larger capacity than the factory, and also much stronger. It actually has extruded end tanks, and it's all TIG welded up, so it is very strong, very beefy. And we ordered up some Mishimoto adapter here for the oil line fitting, so this converts it to an AN style. So this guy just plugs in here with these O-rings on the back, and just like that, this thing converts over to AN fittings. So that is our setup for both cooling the water and the oil. Last piece of the puzzle in our cooling solution here is this Flexolite dual fan setup. This uses twin 12-inch fans. Actually, they're slightly bigger than 12-inch with their S-shaped fin blades. And we actually saw their S-fin technology at PRI last year. And just from the demo that they gave us in the booth where it knocked my hat off with how much air it was moving, we're like, wow, that's really impressive what a difference the shape of the fan blades make. So I think based on that, we were like seduced by the S-shaped fan blades and thought, let's try to fit this into a project. And Pete thought this was a good way to go on the M3. And as it turns out, the one he selected, by the way, is very low profile. It's only like 2 5/8 inch
Yeah,
thick.
that was my go-to.
And you were thinking we may need a low profile setup because of space constraints.
And
in the
these
front of the
just
engine
draw
bay.
so much air. I've used them in the past. They're fantastic.
Yeah, this particular
So-
one is rated to 2,500 CFM, which is a ton of airflow. So rather than putting
keep
a
the
single
2J
on,
cool, right?
yeah, and rather than putting a single on, we figured why not go for maximum efficiency here. So, however, this turns out to be a little bit bigger than our rad. You can see how we are hitting on the inlet here, and it's going to hit maybe down here if we want to get this all the way down to the bottom. So we're sort of pondering our options here, whether we trim this shroud a little bit and try to fit it up, or do we switch out to Flexolite's large singles. So they have some big boy singles that are like 15-inch big with the S-blade technology that can move a lot of CFM, almost as much as this dual fan setup can. Or actually, if you go to the deeper profile ones, they can move even more. I think they have one rated to 3,000 CFM. So I think for now what we'll do is fit up the rad and the oil cooler, take a look at how important it is to have this low profile setup. If we have room for something deeper, then maybe we'll switch it out for a bigger single. So
Gotta say, I do love the mounting solution on the M3. It's just like that, and there we go. That is in place. It's looking mighty fine. Man, that oil cooler is gonna be badass. Now, for our coolant lines, the piping and the hoses, I was worried that the fittings on the M3 would be a hindrance. However, I've just noticed they may actually help us out here, because once I put on this piece here, and I can actually remove this rubber hose so I can keep this plastic tab on, which means we're going to be able to run our top hose very simply. Down below here gets a little bit more tricky. I've noticed that this factory one, once we get this on here, was pointing upwards, so we're trying to mate to this here, and this coolant line is, man, it is just like absolutely massive the way it runs out here. I was hoping there was a solution out there. I haven't done a lot of research yet, but I'm hoping that there's one that swivels like the K-Tune one was for when we did the K-Swap 240, because then you can kind of just turn it whatever way you want. But again, as you can see here, it's not a terrible run, so this isn't going to be difficult. And I think we're going to have lots of room for that fan. So we're going to leave it off. We're going to maybe do a little bit more measuring, see how much space we have here to fit maybe like a one large size fan. So I think the next thing to do here is I want to put the front end on to see how everything fits up. And bam, just like that, I wanted to get this thing on the ground and kind of assess where we were at. But holy smokes, people, this is starting to look like a real car with a 2J in it. I'm beyond excited for this. Wow. We still have lots left to do, but check this out. How epic is this? 2J is mounted up and it looks totally legit. I've still got to figure out what to do with an intercooler. That's why I ended up tearing out that whole fan for the AC and whatnot. But that is for another episode. This one is officially a wrap, so thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, definitely give me a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to click that subscribe button, and if you're not, what about that notifications bell? Have you clicked it? And make sure to check us out on Instagram, because we make sure to post real-time updates on projects and little teasers